Yeah, the great thing about the poll results is they mirror the composition of our panel. We have 2 folks who are staff and 1 who's a faculty member. So it's good balance there. I'm Owen Silverman Andrews. I'm the instructional specialist for Arundel Community College. And that means that I work on curriculum, I teach in our program, and also the focus of today's workshop, I do professional development for our team of 3 to 4 dozen adjunct faculty members in English language learning.
Linda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Neuman. I've been teaching adults English as a second or other language since 2013. And before that, I was teaching children. So I've been teaching ESL in some form since about 2001. I did some work overseas, and I've been back in the States since 2007. And I've also taught for CCBC and many other colleges in Maryland.
Great. And hi, everyone. Good morning. Sharon Ultsch. I am a curriculum specialist at Arundel Community College, and I work with faculty to develop courses, and I also conduct training. But I am an adult ed junkie from way back when. I worked in adult ed for about 25 years, both as a teacher and an adult educator. So this is really thrilling to be here to talk with you about something close and dear to my heart anyway. So now that we've introduced ourselves, we want to get to know you a tiny bit more, and we will be using the chat quite a bit. We are going to try to make this as interactive as humanly possible in this sort of milieu. So if you wouldn't mind writing in the chat, just give us your name, where you're from, but tell us why you wanted to come to this workshop. So that would be great. And Linda will be managing the chat, and they'll give us a chance to see what were the motivations for folks to come here. New strategies of creating PD, terrific. Oh, I love that. How can we continue to grow and learn as adult educators? Thank you for that, Vija. Oh, PD, awesome and interactive. Very great. Excellent. Improve. These are great reasons. Keep populating the chat. We'll go on to the next slide, Owen. We're really thrilled to hear why you're here. Super. So as you're thinking about these are really great reasons. This really feeds right into what we're going to talk about today, which is how to apply adult learning theory to professional development. So this is terrific. But we wanted to start by getting a sense of what your experience has been in professional development. So we actually have 2 poll questions that Ellen will launch for us. And we want to know either from your experience as a person leading professional development, but also as a person experiencing as a participant in professional development. So Ellen, if you want to launch those polls, that would be great.
So I apologize. I am actually getting an error message on poll 2 and 3. So if we can just ask those verbally.
Terrific. So this is always something you need to know as an adult educator. Always have a backup plan, right? Always have a backup plan. So here's the question, and if you could put this in a chat, yes or no. How many of you have ever had the experience of attending a training or workshop that doesn't seem relevant to your job or leaves you feeling like it was a waste of time? Oh. Whoa, lots of yeses coming across. All right, Linda can sort of visually count those up, I guess. All right, second question. How many of you have facilitated or led a training or workshop that made you feel like participants were not engaged or even interested in what you were presenting? That's question number 2.
And maybe when you do yes or no, put a 2 before it so we know you're responding to the second question. 2
Thanks,
yes,
Owen.
2 no. You're welcome.
Mm. We're getting lots of yeses in both accounts. Great, right. So it seems like many of us have had this experience with professional development that's either disconnected, we feel demotivated, or we feel disengaged with the way that we're the learning experience of the training. And despite all the research to the contrary, which is that adults should be self-directed in what they do. We should have a reason for why we're there. Despite all this research, we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again with professional development. And today, in a way, frankly, is in part the same thing for us. And I'm not just nixing, and I'm not just saying just webinars, but I really want to say this would not be my ideal situation of a learning experience, because it's very much a one-way type of communication. And I'm not slamming webinars, because I have sought them out myself during COVID, and I think many of you have as well. But that's the key point. I have been self-directed in trying to find things that I want to learn about. And that's a big difference. And that's something that we're here today to talk about. So why we're here is because we want to make a very specific argument, the three of us. And I will give the punchline, is that we want to suggest that we need to be intentional about our design of training. And by that, I mean by putting adult learning theory back into adult education, professional development. And just to put it another way, basically to walk the talk or practice what we preach. So another thing that we're trying to do in this webinar is sort of disrupt the idea that seat time is equal to learning time, or that everyone has to be in the room at the same time and learning the same thing for the professional development to be impactful, meaningful. So that is one of our agendas, full disclosure today. So if we can bring adult education principles back into professional development, we might avoid this. Next slide.
Okay, so I want to give us some of the context here about our program at Arundel Community College, so you can decide what applies to your program and what might not transfer as directly. So we're a medium to large size community college, and in our English language learning and adult education department specifically, unlike some other colleges, we have both our English for Academic Purposes program and our community English, which we call English Basic Skills, housed within the same department. And within our grant-funded English Basic Skills, the bulk of it comes from funding from the Maryland Higher Education Commission, which doesn't have the great structure that Department of Labor provides. And it also doesn't have the professional development requirement for faculty that the Department of Labor provides. So we have, as many of our faculty are working in multi-level classrooms where students are coming with different levels of prior knowledge, different motivations, we have the same issue as we're designing professional learning for our faculty, different goals, different requirements, different starting points, and even different ways in which they're applying it to their work. And as I came in about 3 or 4 years ago, our focus was very much on a workshop style of professional development in which faculty showed up and sat down, and there was engaging content, but there was not much in the way of pre-work, and there was not much in the way of post-work follow-up. It was a one and done style of workshop. And we've worked over the past few years, not just because of the disruption of the pandemic, but in part in order to move towards a model that is more flipped and hybrid, that is more faculty directed, in which they're following their own needs and interests, and more differentiated based on the different programs that our faculty members teach in. So we're really trying to apply adult learning theory to this situation. And I want to pose another disclaimer that we're not claiming to have all the answers. Some of what we're applying here, I've learned at other programs that I was an adjunct in, including CCBC, BCCC, Prince George's Community College, and others. I also want to say that what we really want to have is an engaging conversation on what constitutes professional development. And we hope that starts today and continues offline as we're going forward.
And I just want to add, picking up on what you just said, Owen, about this idea of we really have an interest in professional development that shifts the culture in our organization, to move from this one-off workshop instrumentalist idea about a professional development to something that fosters more deeper learning and a learning culture that is more transformational. So just let me quickly say something about transformational, because this too is another adult ed learning theory forwarded by Mesereau. Mesereau defines transformative learning as those learning experiences that cause a shift in an individual's perspective. This happens when adult learners change their assumptions or expectations. What often follows is a change in their frame of reference for interpretation and understanding. Something those of us that teach adults want to have happen in the classroom, and certainly something that we want to have happen in our professional development sessions working with faculty. And for learning to be transformational rather than instrumental, the one-off model, it needs to be meaningful to the learner. And we want our PD for adult education to be meaningful. So there's a brief background. Owen is now going to give you sort of our agenda for today.
Yeah, so now that we've determined what your motivations are for being here, and we've shared some of the background, hopefully activating all the great prior learning that you're bringing to this, we want to state the objectives very clearly and overtly. So the first is that, we're introducing a self-directed faculty development schema and connect to adult learning principles. We want to illustrate one method for delivering self-directed PD, which is a flipped and hybrid model, which we've tested in the fall and have implemented another version of it this winter. We want to advocate, we'll share a template for a reflective journaling that is currently in testing. So you can have that template, you can experiment with it in your own programs, you can provide us feedback on what worked and what didn't. And we want to advocate for an alternative model for PD. Could it be badging or something else? And then we want to invite all of you to engage in a community of practice to further explore professional learning and delivery alternatives.
Great. Next slide. It's an ambitious agenda. So what I want to say is that because we're trying to make this interactive, we may have to make changes towards the end, but this is what we're striving for. This is our aspiration for today. Linda will put in the chat a link to a folder that has the materials that we're using today and that we'd like to ask you to refer to at certain points during the presentation. And it's a bit.ly link. You'll see it here on the screen. And Linda will also put it in the chat, so it's available to you as well. And you'll see in that link, and we're giving you a moment to go in. Feel free to download them on your desktop or do whatever's best for you. You'll see 5 documents in there. And if you want to, again, put them on your desktop and open them up, that would be great. One of them that we'll use fairly soon is the Learning Differences and Neurodiversity Agenda, which is basically, Owen will be talking about what we tried for PD and what he tried for PD in the fall. You'll also see a reflective journal PD handout, which is the second one that we'll talk about today. And then the third one that I'd like to point you to is what's called a job aid for evaluating professional development. And that one we would love you to use during our talk today. So we'll give you a minute to take a pause, let you open up those documents and have a chance to get them onto your desktop, because we will be referring to them. Great. I think if anybody's having any trouble, they could let us know in the chat. Off to you, Owen.
Okay, so we're really embracing multitasking. We're not trying to fight against it. We know you'll be doing other things as you're engaging with us, and that's part of adult learning, is that you can multitask and prioritize which content you're engaging with when. So check out those documents, and we'll be asking you to evaluate us based on some of those documents as well. So again, let's go back to the theory a little bit. How many of you are familiar with the term pedagogy? That is a term that we've heard widely in our programs of education, our background education. Andragogy was a newer term to me. I learned it while working at Strong City, Baltimore in 2016 and 2017. So in the chat, if you're very familiar with the term andragogy, put a 3. If you know it but not well, write a 2. And if you're not familiar with this term, write a 1. We really want to assess and respect that folks are coming to this with different levels of knowledge, and also as ESOL teachers, not assume vocabulary, but actually teach vocabulary in context as much as possible. So again, 3 if you're very familiar with this term andragogy, 2 if you know it but not well, and 1 if you're not familiar with this. And as those numbers are rolling in, you can also take it to the next level. If you'd like to, put in the chat what one characteristic of andragogy is that's different from pedagogy. So for example, you could finish this sentence: adults learn best when ... And as you're engaging there, I'll say that when we polled our own adjunct faculty as we were developing our professional learning plan for the year, adult learning theory and andragogy were some of the terms that our faculty were least familiar with. And we sought to find out, well, is that an issue of terminology and vocabulary? As you know, we're in a constant alphabet soup of different terms, or is that more reflective of a need to further develop their understanding of these bedrock principles of adult learning theory? We also want to encourage you to look at the 3s in the chat. Who are the people in your networks who are saying, yes, I know this, and I'm familiar with this? Those are folks that we encourage you to seek out. We're not of course, we're not the sole experts on this topic. You have a lot of experts across the field and within our state specifically. So use that social learning theory, engage with your colleagues who are saying that they have more knowledge and application of this term than you may have. And if you're a 3, look for folks who may have an earlier stage of their knowledge on this topic and reach out to them, see if they want to work with you and partner with you. So I would just say, in its simplest definition, pedagogy refers to children and andragogy refers to adults, right? But let's get a little bit deeper than that.
So here's a crash course in andragogy. And frankly, it looks like there are several people in the chat that could be doing this in addition to the 3 of us. So it's great to have your comments in the chat when they apply the learning, when they are responsible for their learning. You're hitting on all the key factors around andragogy. This is great. So Owen, if you could hit the next piece to this. Great. So here you'll see, I'm not going to read that. I'll highlight a couple of things. This is actually the same format that's used in the handout that I referred to earlier that's in the bit.ly link. So you can read this. I don't need to read all of it to you, but I did want to point out a couple of things about the distinction between pedagogy and andragogy that are important. So Malcolm Knowles is an adult educator and researcher, and he coined the term around 1950, but has added to it since then. And I just want to say there are actually several different adult learning theories, but we're choosing to talk about andragogy for this presentation specifically. And so a couple of key differences, and like I said, I think people have already pointed some of this out in the chat, is that in a pedagogy, students come with not a lot of experience necessarily, whereas in andragogy, adults come with a lot of experience. And so, interesting enough, when we started this presentation, we asked you about your experience, right? So that's one key difference between pedagogy and andragogy. Another one that I think we could point out is what motivates somebody to learn. And folks in the chat pointed out things like if it's related to their job, if it's practical experience. That is often a trait of andragogy. It's not entirely, although again, these are generalizations to some. I know some students that might say otherwise, but with pedagogy, it's really, there's often external or extrinsic ways that they're motivated, be it by a grade or a test or some sort of other external motivator. So that's just, these are some of the differences. And again, you can review these, but what we'd like to actually do is show you a really terrific 2-minute video that sort of briefly highlights these. And if you put on the next slide, and this video was created by an instructional designer in Canada, Rebecca Hogue, who I've discovered since and really has a great blog, and you can look her up on the web if you'd like to. But what we'd like to ask you to do is, while you're watching this 2-minute video, if you might just make a note, feel free to just write it down or add it to the chat. Was there anything in this describing, as she describes these 6 principles, that you feel was surprising or new or somehow strongly resonated with you? We'd like to open that up to you. Either write it down and add it to the chat after, or as you're watching. So fire away, Owen. I think you have to put the computer sound share, maybe.
Okay.
Andragogy. It had 4 principles about the way adults learn. However, over time and with further research, 2 additional andragogical principles were added. It's important to note that these are generalizations and don't necessarily apply to individual people. The learners need to know. The core principle is that adults need to know why before they engage in learning. It is believed to be more effective if adult learners have shared control of the learning process. There are 3 dimensions to this need to know. First, how the learning will be conducted. Second, what learning will occur. And third, why the learning is important. Self-directed learning. Adults can and do engage in self-directed learning. Adults assume ownership of their own learning. This can mean choosing a formal class or independent study. It does not mean that all adults like to self-teach. Rather, the idea here is that adults make the choice of how they approach the need to learn something new. Prior experience of the learner. Adults bring a plethora of unique experiences to the classroom. Adults' prior experience impacts learning because their previous knowledge is built upon. However, adults' prior experience can also cause biases that can create a natural tendency to resist new learning. Readiness to learn. Adults generally become ready to learn when something in their life causes them to need to learn something. For example, a new job or career change. Further, adults may have many life impediments to learning, such as family and career, which can negatively affect an adult's readiness to learn. Orientation to learning and problem solving. Adults generally prefer a problem-solving orientation to learning rather than a subject orientation to learning. Further, adults learn best when the skill or knowledge is placed into a real-world context. Motivation to learn. Adults tend to be more motivated to learn by things that help them solve real-world problems or help to improve their lives in some way. They tend to be more intrinsically motivated, wanting to be successful learners and wanting to enjoy the learning process.
Great. Thank you, Owen. We'll go to the next one. Next slide. Super. So very brief, and yes, somebody asked to share the link in the chat. I will, or we'll share it, we'll add it to the bit.ly, I think, so everybody can have it. It is a really simple but clear way of describing, and it very much could be a training tool that folks might want to use even in their own program. So we'd like to just open it up for a couple of minutes in the chat. Was there anything that Rebecca described about the principles of andragogy and the new ones that were added that surprised, were new, or somehow strongly resonated with you that you'd like to share with the group? We'll give you a chance to write something in the chat if you like. I definitely have one that I'd like to talk about just briefly myself, and I don't know if Linda and Owen, you have one, but I think the idea about prior knowledge, I've always been an adult educator that felt that prior knowledge could be really a benefit and an asset when I'm working with adults. But her point about it also being something that can cause biases and resistance to new learning, I think is really critical. And I don't know if other folks have had that experience, but it's often either misinformation or misunderstandings or other sort of learnings that may get in the way of actually adding new information or even in their worldview, which I think has often been something I've had to work through as an adult educator working with adults. And someone in the chat, it's great to remind our adult learners are problem solvers. Yeah, how often do we reflect on this, especially in the pandemic? Right, and that's the idea of this readiness to learn, that there's something that's actually motivating you or getting you to want to learn something. There's something happening in your external life in some ways. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments that people would like to make in the chat? Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, thanks, Kaylee, for that, about the idea of focusing on the problem solving and how much that matters to adults, and orientation into the way that we teach, but even into professional development. I think that's something that I know Owen has said, you know, that taking that into account, what are some challenges that come up for you in your teaching that you want to research more, you want to understand more? So yeah, thank you for that. So feel free to keep adding in the chat if you like. I think we'll go to the next slide, Owen. This tag team on a webinar is so interesting, I have to say. It feels a little bit like the Dick Van Dyke Show, but it's great. So what I have here is the three of us worked on developing the handout that I mentioned to you is in the bit.ly that you might use, and just an invitation to sort of either evaluate the professional development you have been given, or it even could be used as a kickoff for a design. And so what we did is we took the different principles that you just saw in the video, the 6 different principles, and sort of brainstormed some questions you might ask that would point to a design example. So for example, I'll just look at the first, I'm not going to read this to you. I think you can read this in bit.ly, but I'll just point out a couple of things to think about. So the need to know, you know, in the video, she talked about having the how, what, and why before you actually do professional development, which we actually tried to model here today as well. But do trainees know why they need to learn something? Do they know the advantages of what they're learning? And does learning improve the quality of life or their work performance? Are you including that in your professional development in some way? I'll pick another one. The second one, experience. Does the training connect to previous knowledge? Has the training been adapted to the real needs of the learner? Again, we think about this with our adult students. Do we also think about this with the teachers that we work? Does our PD actually address a need that they've raised or brought up? So now we'd like to ask if you would invite you. As I said, this has been turned into a handout that, or a job aid, as you'd like to call it, that you can use for your work. And we'd like to ask you to open it up, if you could, on your desktop or whatever's handy, and take a look at it. And then I think I'm turning this over to you now, Owen.
Yeah, so as you're looking at that, I'll describe the first of a series of professional learning and development workshops and in this flipped hybrid model that we're moving towards. And we're not just jumping from a show up, sit down and engage model of workshops to this flipped hybrid model all at once. We're kind of scaffolding that transition. And so this one, again, is not using a revolutionary tool. It's using links, which many of you use. And the focus of all of our professional learning and development workshops this year is through the lens of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. This one is focusing specifically on learning disabilities, learning differences, and neurodiversity. And I want to share the full agenda is in the Google folder that we shared via the bit.ly, but I want to share kind of how we set this up and how we started to acclimate our faculty to this new way of doing our professional development. So we had a synchronous component, which was 4:30 to 5:30, but before that synchronous component, we asked our faculty to engage in completing a links module and to bring that knowledge, not just to bring the certificate of completion, but to bring that knowledge both to the synchronous workshop that was 4:30 to 5:30 on Zoom, but also to our learning management system, Canvas, where they were having an ongoing discussion. So really squeezing the most out of that asynchronous model and blending it into the synchronous model. And we found that to be very successful. We also wanted to differentiate based on technology awareness and technology comfort levels among our very diverse faculty. And so some folks got the links concept right away. They were able to log in. And some folks through their teaching use our learning management system Canvas more than others. But some of our faculty needed a little bit more guidance. And so this 4:30 to 5:30 was the first hour where everyone was invited to participate. And then after that, we kept the Zoom open for another 2 hours to help faculty get set up in links, to help them navigate Canvas. And so that time was available to them as a semi-synchronous experience. And so I think it's really important that we don't assume technological literacy of every platform, and to understand that problem solving and digital literacy is an issue also for our faculty sometimes. Everyone was able to eventually complete it and to engage both on links and Canvas and in the live session, but different people needed different scaffolds. And we find that's true in our classrooms. It's also true in our professional development. And then you can see the objectives on the right-hand side, pretty practical, right? Some of them were defining terms. Some of them were related to applying some of the strategies from the links module to their teaching, and they posted that part to Canvas. So there's a permanent discussion board that's ongoing where folks are talking about what they're planning to apply and how it went. And then also very practical, one of the objectives was gauging their ability to identify contact information for DSS, Disability Support Services, at AACC. So I'll turn it over to Linda now, who's going to share from a faculty perspective some of the pluses and areas for growth for this type of professional development.
Okay,
sorry, Linda, can I just ask a question before you start? Owen, we wanted to link up your PD with these principles of andragogy. And I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about where you think this design sort of hits on some of those 6 principles. So one question I wanted to ask you is, does this training focus on not just content, but on practical use? Does it present competencies, abilities, and knowledge? Where do you see that link, for example, to that principle?
Yeah, so I think very much, especially objective number 3, the ability to, if they have further questions, we acknowledge that the information in links and the information we're discussing in the workshop won't satisfy and won't cover everything that people need to know. And so one of the objectives is for them to know who the experts are on campus and how to contact them for their own questions, how to introduce them to students who may have issues, and that's very, very practical, very concrete, something they can, put in their wallet or save to their desktop and do over and over again. Number 2 is also about transfer. From what they're working on in the module online into what they're doing in the classroom, and they're making that an intention, a goal that they're setting themselves. I'm not, we didn't say the third of these principles in the links module is the most important. Make sure you implement that when we observe your classes. We'll be looking for that. They really had the flexibility to self-identify which they wanted to apply and how.
Great. So I'm hearing 2 andragogy principles in action. Just again, just to let the audience know that the reason we had that handout is that this is one way that you can evaluate and interrogate your professional development to see if it's actually meeting those principles. So 2, I hear you say, Owen, are 1, the problem solving orientation, that the PD was really geared towards how to help them problem solve for their teaching. But then the second one about self-directed and sort of their motivation for this is something that they're choosing to learn. So thank you for that. Yeah, over to you, Linda.
Okay, so what I particularly liked about this arrangement for PD were these 4 factors that I've listed here. And so the first one obviously was the convenience factor. I could go ahead to links whenever I wanted to, and I could go through the workshop as quickly or as slowly as I wanted to. For those of you who have done this before, you know that they give you additional resources that you can go to if you choose. You can also sort of set those aside to go through later. So it gives you a lot of control. And it was also kind of exciting because I knew that we'd sort of be unpacking all of it later in the faculty meeting. And I was kind of curious to see how everyone else reacted to the workshop. And I'm just a big flipped classroom fan. I think it's the best way to immediately engage the learner and give them all that control. So this resonated with me personally as a teacher too. I thought the content in this particular workshop was interesting and professional and authoritative. Whatever I went to had a lot of good information for me. So I had a good feeling about the workshop itself and how it had been set up. And I like getting the certificate at the end. It is a record of what I've done because you end up doing a number of workshops and some of them you can immediately apply, some maybe not, but it is nice to have those tangible records to go back to. So those were the things that I especially appreciated about doing the workshop. And then going to the discussion afterward in the faculty meeting, I think some of the people that we're going to share on the next screen, that was one of the things that people liked the best of all, was after going to the online workshop, they were able to discuss with their colleagues. And some people even said that what they learned in those discussions was just as helpful, if not even more helpful than what they got out of the workshop. Yeah, right. Before we get to those, we'll talk about just my thoughts on what teachers might not like about it. And I think that thanks to COVID and the migration to online learning, mass migration, I think there are fewer and fewer teachers who are strictly opposed to it. And I feel that there is some opening up of attitudes about online learning. But there are still some people who don't like to have to constantly be learning new things online. And if that includes their own PD, they may not appreciate this. But one of the big problems for people who have that kind of approach to it is that maybe they don't have anyone nearby to help them when they get in a jam or when they get stuck on something. And so, Owen, that was why it was so good that you gave that option to people, that you don't have to do this on your own time. If you want, we can actually, kind of do this together. So Yeah, and I'm online all the time, and I teach a couple of online courses. I've been doing that for years, and I still have trouble with certain functions, and you just never know when something's going to pop up. But again, I think that the important thing there is that you have a support person that you can go to, and Owen opened his door and helped me figure that out. So on the next screen, we have some actual quotes from people. We got about a 65% participation rate on the online workshop. We have, what was it? 21 people did the synchronous type of PD, and then 23 doing asynchronous, and they received their certificate. So that's kind of the departmental proof that people actually went through that workshop, and then teachers have that. So this was something that I felt very strongly about, was that it was good to read up on the topic before the discussion. Most of the time when we get to the faculty workshop, we're not always primed on what we're going to be talking about. So it's nice to be able to do something beforehand so that you're all bringing something to the meeting, and you're all kind of bringing something similar to the meeting. Also, there were plenty of people who liked this flipped format, and also the time that they were given to complete the training. Owen, was it about 3 weeks?
Yeah, at least. I think I tried to give a month's notice
Okay.
and different, timelines for doing that, different structures for doing that was really important.
Yeah, so people felt like they had plenty of advance time to get this done. And of course, once you go into the workshop, then it's up to you to schedule your time the way you want. But since we don't ever know exactly what's going to pop up, it's always good to have all that advance notice. So people appreciated that. And then, and I think that made them more motivated when they attended the meeting. And then some of the, what you might call negative remarks included the issue that we already talked about, which was frustration with online bugs or things that maybe they just didn't like about the interface. So, and then in general, there are still some people who are struggling with being in the virtual world, but I do sense in these comments, and they are exact quotes, I'm sensing that there is a lot of openness to working on that, and a realization that this is the future. So I think we have one more screen. About the topic itself, which was learning disabilities among our student population, there were people who had really no contact at all with DSS, Department of Student Services, or Disability Student Services. Mm-hmm. And I had, because one day I found out that I was going to have a blind student in my in-person class, and I ended up having a lot of very good and productive exchange with the DSS. They were really a partner in how we got this student to get the most out of the class. We worked on things together all the time. And so it helped me to understand what kind of resources we have that we can bring to these classrooms. And then someone said that this was their favorite PD so far. They liked the follow-up ideas that came from the discussion, and felt that it was a timely topic, because you really just don't know. And sometimes you suspect, and often you may suspect, that there may be learning disabilities in your classroom, and you don't really know where to go from there. So now we have something to work with in that regard. And then there were also suggestions that links and resources that people were talking about in the discussion. We now have a place to go online where we can be posting this information and sharing it with others. And that was our first time doing something like this. I think it was a pretty big success. The remarks that we got were overwhelmingly positive, and the negative ones were just from people who are feeling frustrated, but definitely open to doing this again. So we have another one in the pipeline right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Owen to talk about the future of PD.
Right. So the next step in moving away from this structured banking model of PD to a more faculty-driven, independent model is our reflective journaling project. And this is a reflective journaling project, again, that has a framework of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the two touch points in terms of theory that we're asking our faculty to engage with are culturally sustaining andragogy and critical language awareness. And we provide definitions of those two terms and links to further reading in the template that you'll find in the Google folder. But just as we're not going to focus on the deep theoretical meanings behind these terms, we didn't expect faculty to, read dozens of pages on these terms. But we did expect them to understand, in terms of critical language awareness, that power is a major component of language learning. So the relationship between culture, power, language, and learning is really important. And for culturally sustaining andragogy, the importance of creating spaces in the classroom where students from diverse backgrounds are not only having their cultures acknowledged and the content and learning that's happening is not only relevant, but they're also generative spaces where they can sustain and build cultural knowledge. So the document that's in the Google folder and contains a summary of the assignment, guidelines, definitions of the terms, and supplemental materials, as well as templates for these reflective journaling activities. The idea is that faculty will write 3 reflective journaling entries after teaching a class, looking back on what went well, what could have been better from a lens of anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. And then one final summative entry in which they're going a little bit deeper and looking to the future. And so I want to provide the initial feedback that I got from our faculty as I was rolling this out. And I think this is something that you can't do in a one and done type workshop where you have people, show up, sit down and engage. You can't tweak things as you go along as easily. And so I made multiple changes based on faculty input as we were rolling out this process over the course of the fall and into December. So we went from having 4 initial reflective journaling entries down to 3 and giving faculty more time to complete each. I created, and this is something that Sharon always promotes, I created a video to explain the text-based instructions. So they were, it was a 2-page document, and I felt great that I was able to fit all that information on just 2 pages, but it was very text dense. And so I created a video that in a more conversational style explained what the expectations were. The third part that I think is really, really important is, especially when it comes to issues around anti-racism, faculty, we have to meet faculty where they are, and you have to be supportive and understanding, but you also have to be clear and to some degree firm about the undergirding values of our institution and the direction we're moving the department. And so as you engage kind of different topics around, race evasiveness, or, can I write about something totally unrelated to diversity and equity, you have to set up the structure of the activity in a way that has guidelines that are tangible in terms of requiring deep and critical reflection. So those are some of the initial feedback that I got that I applied right away, and we'll continue to do that as we roll that into the winter and spring quarters, where faculty will have another chance to engage the same project again.
And so, Owen, I'd like to just pick up on, again, looking at that design of that PD to bring it back to these explicit principles for andragogy that I at least see in action in what you design. Principle 3, the idea of self-concept or self-directed learning. Does the trainee acknowledge adults' autonomy and allow them to make choices in relation to the learning process? That certainly is an example of that, it seems to me. And people can write in the chat, if you do have that document open, the job aid, if you've seen some other things in what Owen's described in either PD, feel free to note that in the chat for all of us. But I also think principle 6, the idea of intrinsic motivation, this idea that if the instructor is a facilitator, so as a PD, as a person who's designing the PD, Owen, you're playing the role of facilitator, not sage on stage, if you will, and letting the learner motivate themselves, right? And I think your final point about how and why principle 1, I think is really important, that what you're trying to do is connect what they're doing to the values of the institution that they're working at. Here's how and why we're doing this. So those are 3 principles I see truly in action in what you just described. But others, feel free to write in the chat other ones that you've noted that you might have seen. So where does the future take us? I think that's the next slide we're on, right? So one idea we're playing around with at Arundel, and I know there's some other institutions that have already started doing this. I'm thinking of Montgomery College is one, and there may be others that I don't know about, is the idea of how to create micro badges for this professional development. And these, again, I'm not sure everyone's familiarity with badges. They're a digital credential. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just quickly show you internally. And I'm not going to take a lot of time on this because this is still an idea in progress and other folks might have had some experience they can add to the chat with this. But the idea is that any professional development we do is clearly, the objectives are clearly defined, there's clear deliverables for that objective, but it's recognized beyond the institution, right? It's something that people can add as a credential to their LinkedIn account, to their resume, when they go on a job interview, et cetera, that it sort of recognizes the learning, which is actually really important as well. And I think that was your point, Linda, that you mentioned about you liked getting the, the certificate at the end, that this really is this idea back again to andragogy about mastery. And that what we're encouraging is competency and mastery, not necessarily a grade, not necessarily a transcript. And so I feel like badging really links into that concept of competency and mastery versus some other transcriptive grading kind of assessment evaluation. And that's just a quickie on badging. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think we're going to go to the next. The digital badges can look like you can put your logo on them and make them look very professional and show where they come from. And again, all of the information on what's embedded in the badge can be clicked on and opened up for anyone who looks at it. And I think that's really an advantage to it. So in the nearly last slide, we're wondering from you, feel free to take a couple of minutes in the chat. I think we have about 8 minutes to go here from my clock, but tell me if I'm wrong, Ellen or somebody else. What might be the obstacles to any of the models that we've described here? We're not Pollyannas who think we have pie in the sky. We're curious what you think some of the obstacle might be. And we have another reason for that is because we're hoping there are folks on this webinar who might also put in the chat their contact information if you'd be interested in exploring how we as a group might become a community of practice to look at how we can create alternatives to professional development for adult educators in the greater Maryland area with work under the Department of Labor. So, obstacles. Resistance to change, what has worked or seemed to work for many years. Yeah, that's a good one, Lewis. Thank you for that, that there can be a lot of resistance to change. And I'd love to hear some other folks talk about how you worked around that. I think that conversation about why change matters and how do we make people comfortable with change? How do we scaffold their learning so they're comfortable with change? I think is also really important. I don't know if Linda and Owen have a thought about that one as well.
Yeah, I think it's convenient and helpful that the adult learning theory of gradually scaffolding the change also works well in terms of internal advocacy, because then you get to show the positive feedback that you got from the first workshop that was in this new direction. You get to build that into a presentation that you do for the Department of Labor, and that continues to reinforce the positive cycle of feedback and experimentation.
Great.
Yeah, and also just making sure you get that direct feedback afterward, and with the attitude of, we want to learn how we could do better. And you are a big part of that by telling us what you didn't like so that we can work on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, change writ globally is, again, looking at what do we value and what are our aspirations and what does it take to get there. And I don't know if all of you have had this experience, but often change can be dictated to you rather than you participate in creating the change. And I think that's really key, at least for me, that's been really key, that you involve the stakeholders in creating the change. And I think that might be also why people have some resistance, because it's sometimes it's top down rather than working with the folks that are impacted by the change to determine what needs to happen. That's my.
It might be good to get some input before presenting something, or as you're considering certain types of PD, to get the input before it actually happens from the people who will participate.
Anything else? So again, we want to invite you, if you want to put your contact information in the chat, Ellen, we will save the chat, if you're interested in exploring this with us as a group that might look at PD in general and how we might improve, change, or help each other and support each other, creating some sort of network around this. We can also share PD as well. So there's lots of alternatives we could look at, and we'd love it to know if those of you that might want to be involved in a further conversation. So on the next slide, what we're trying to do is move from this, where we started this talk about PD, how do we move PD from this to the next slide? To this. And in this slide, we want, what you can see, I hope, is that faculty are engaged with the learning because they're motivated, self-directed, see it as relevant problem solving. And we hope that PD is learning is transformative and fostering deep learning, not just instrumental, not just a workshop that you check off on the box, that this is really what our aspiration is for PD in our program. And we hope you all will share that aspiration with us as well. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Owen and Linda, I'll leave you to final things you might want to say.
Yeah, I think we're in the time for Q&A now. So if folks have any quick questions to pop in the chat, we can try to respond to you. It's 11 o'clock now, and we will continue this conversation. We'll put our contact information in the chat as well, but this has been great. We've really enjoyed engaging with you. Yeah,
we should put our contact information in. So thank you to Ellen and folks for making this possible as well. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you so much to our team from Anne Arundel Community College. What fantastic ideas.